Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today for this Google Cloud virtual fireside chat. I'm Madhav Chinnappa. I'm Director of News Ecosystem Development, and I work on our Google News Initiative. I'm thrilled to be joined by Chris Taylor, the Chief Operating Officer for the Telegraph, for this virtual fireside chat. Welcome, Chris.
Lovely to be here. Thanks for having me.
So those of us in the UK all know about the Telegraph, but for those of us further afield, could you tell us a bit more about the Telegraph and also your role as COO there?
Yeah, for sure. The Telegraph is one of the oldest and leading premium newspaper companies in the UK. A very long history, going back more than 160 years, and has been right at the centre of a lot of pivotal events in UK and world history over that time. These days, of course, the Telegraph is much more than a newspaper. The newspaper is still very important to us, but we also have a very substantial digital presence, a long history of innovation. First newspaper in the UK online back in the early 1990s, and today a very focused digital subscriptions strategy. My role as Chief Operating Officer composes a lot of different things, actually. The majority of my background is in tech and digital product in media. It's where I spent most of my career. I'm responsible for those things here at the Telegraph, but I also look after broader business operations, including things like the print, production, and distribution of the newspaper itself.
And to better understand the role of technology and Google Cloud at the Telegraph, could you give us a couple of examples of the ways that Google Cloud is helping the Telegraph?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. The Telegraph and Google have had a very long-standing relationship, actually, and like a lot of publishers, we work with Google more broadly on lots of different levels, both using Google products to run the company and publishing our content onto Google platforms. But Google Cloud, quite specifically, performs a couple of key roles. Firstly, it provides the collaboration tools that are used throughout the company to get the day-to-day job done. And I think that's been a particularly important, useful, and powerful part of the engagement during the turbulence of the last few months. Google Cloud also provides a lot of our infrastructure as a service, our cloud infrastructure, upon which a lot of our digital assets and digital publishing ecosystem runs, and also the technology that provides a lot of our more complex data processing and data analysis. So there's a few aspects to the Google Cloud engagement there, but pretty helpful over the last few months.
And why Google Cloud, if I may ask?
So very interesting. Some of it is down to that long-standing relationship with Google more broadly. And I think Google Cloud as it exists now has obviously grown together from a number of different initiatives within Google. So I suppose we've been involved with Google Cloud for many years as one of the first Google Apps customers in the UK. But perhaps more significantly, about 18 months ago, we decided to move the majority of our cloud infrastructure from AWS to GCP. And we did that for a couple of reasons, actually. Both great sets of products, both great companies. But I think it's funny to think of Google as the fast follower. And in the cloud infrastructure game, Google is kind of the fast follower, with all of the positives that come with that culture of kind of innovation, the willingness to experiment, the slightly more kind of bleeding edge development of the product. All of those things appeal to us. And I think because of the breadth and the depth of the relationship we enjoy with the team at Google in the broader sense, it was a very easy decision to make the move over. And I think on the data side, some of the Google Cloud products on the data side really are, genuinely ahead of the rest of the market. So it's the obvious choice, I think, on that space.
You mentioned migration there. I've heard about the Anthos app migration project. Could you tell us a little bit more about it and how it's gone?
Yeah, certainly. So I like to think of us as quite a mature user of cloud technologies. So that means that I suppose you could even say we have a bit of a cloud legacy where we have some first generation cloud migrations, particularly virtual machines that were migrated simply into cloud infrastructure in the kind of first wave. And equally, we're also keen to experiment and try new tools when they become available. And one of the pieces of sort of legacy cloud infrastructure we had was our old digital archive. Old first generation VMs moved into the cloud, not really in a usable state, not really something that we could exploit within the Telegraph to help drive our subscription strategy. And therefore, our readers potentially don't get the experience that we would like them to have. So we used the Anthos tool to carry out our first containerization and migration of those digital archive virtual machines into GCP, and worked very well. We were, the first time certainly we had used it, and it was a very new product. So of course there was a little bit of learning and discovering around the edges on both sides, but it definitely made what otherwise would have been a much more long-running and complex project much more straightforward. And I think will help with further migrations from whether it's in our on-premise data center, in other cloud providers, into GCP in the future. So we'll definitely be using it more.
I have to ask the pandemic questions. How would you say that the Telegraph has reacted to these challenging times, and what role do you think that technology's played in this, and how do you think the British population has been impacted by this?
Well, they have certainly been challenging times. I must say I'm very proud of how the Telegraph as a whole has responded. I think there's so many aspects to the challenges that we faced, and indeed to the role that I think it was important that we as a company overall play in that, and the role that technology played. So if I perhaps break it down into a few of those parts. So firstly, I think we experienced the same challenges any company would, having to very rapidly go from largely in-office working to a situation where everybody was working in a very dispersed way. We never actually shut our offices completely because we have a newsroom to run, but we went down to something like 5% capacity. So the vast majority of people working remotely pretty much overnight. And that actually went really well. A few refinements, a little bit of issuing of equipment to people, a little bit of guidance and advice. But because we had spent a long time both developing a culture of kind of trust and the idea of kind of flexible working being something that we were reasonably comfortable with, albeit not practiced anything like the scale as it's had to be in the last few weeks, of course. And because we had adopted some of those cloud-based collaboration technologies early on, as well as some more traditional remote access technologies, we were quite well set up for that initial transition. The second challenge for us, which is much closer to our kind of core strategic purpose, is we are a major national newspaper. And in times of major crisis like we have experienced during the pandemic, there's an important journalistic mission that the journalists at the Telegraph have to make sure that people are still getting their news, they're informed, they're still interrogating and inquiring around the events of the day and packaging that up, whether it's in print or in digital format, for our readers and subscribers. Absolutely central to why we're here. And there was no way in which we could allow that flow of journalism, news gathering and publishing to be interrupted. And as you will know from having worked in the media industry yourself, newsrooms themselves are quite unique places. They're almost a little bit like complex factories in terms of the processes that are involved, the routines, the quality controls, everything. There's quite a lot that goes into running and operating a newsroom. It's much, much more than just an office environment. So recreating some of the essential elements of that process, like the daily conferences, for example, that the editor holds, where he meets with his senior team. They discuss the news of the day. What are they getting down the wires? What appear to be developing stories online? What do they perhaps have from sources? What position is the Telegraph going to take on the issues of the day or the issues of moment? Those are critical set piece events in the day to the news gathering and news publishing process. And they are, by tradition, done in person. And all of a sudden, we're in a situation where they can't be done in person anymore. So recreating that, using Google Meet actually as the method, was something that was a top priority focus for us. And I'm extremely pleased to say that it went very well. It has now become embedded as the standard way in which this is done. And I think probably will stay at least a partially virtual process going forward, when that was never the case before. And I think the editorial team responded amazingly well to the need to make that transition. And that, I think, is one of the absolutely key things. And that's a key example of where technology very specifically addressed a very particular Telegraph challenge and, helped us navigate through it without missing a beat, really.
It's fantastic to hear that the technology from Google Cloud can enable all the things that you need to do your very important journalistic mission. Have you been able to quantify the impact of the cloud technology, either time or cost saved or number of people served?
Well, it's really interesting. So because we've been cloud customers for quite a long time, 10 years or so, the cloud journey at the Telegraph, a lot of those sort of initial cloud adoption type measures are long in our history, actually. So some of those first generation efficiency gains, collaboration gains, I mean, they are just sort of normal run of business for us and have been for a long time. So we do see, we do adjust our cloud ecosystem periodically for sort of to help try and reduce costs or increase efficiency, and by degrees, right? And I think we have become reasonably sophisticated at that. I mean, the big obvious stat and kind of indicator is that we've seen a tenfold increase in the use of Meet during this period. And that is from a company who was one of the first adopters of these technologies. So it's not a new thing for us, but it's been absolutely central. We've seen really big, similar proportion increases in the sharing of documents and that kind of thing, particularly during the first stages of the pandemic, when people were obviously setting up their kind of collaboration posture as they prepared to work in a dispersed way for a long period of time. But I think the biggest kind of metrics of note for us, really, and it's the same as I believe across much of the industry, is the really, really strong growth in digital subscriptions. So it's well understood that during times of real crisis, people turn to premium established news brands that they know and trust, both to find out what's going on, but also to seek the opinion and the kind of comment and analysis that comes from places like the Telegraph. We take that role very seriously. And the ultimate expression of people's interest and appetite is the rate at which people are subscribing to our digital journalism. And we have seen very, very substantial increases through this period, as you would expect. And I think we would hope that not only is that because people were particularly interested in subscribing to Telegraph journalism during the pandemic, but also shows an ever increasing interest and willingness to pay for news and to subscribe for the longer term as well. So I think that's been the area where we've seen the biggest change. And the very presentation of that digital subscription is all powered by technology, much of which comes from Google.
Stepping back a bit, there's lots of cliches about how the world has changed or changing and all of that. How would you say this is reflected in the Telegraph on important things like diversity, equity, and inclusion? Has the technology helped with that? What's your general approach around that area?
Yeah, so again, another really important question, and I think I'm going to answer it slightly backwards, actually, because I would almost put it as, how has diversity and inclusion helped us navigate and survive this period? Okay, because I think that's the way around, actually, because 2 or 3 years ago, there was a cultural sea change here at the Telegraph to really recognize and prioritize the importance of diversity and inclusion. And it's been something that has been part of a positive cultural cycle of cultural change and development here over the last, say, 3 years or so. What it's meant, I think, is that we're now have a cultural posture which is much more inclusive, much more trusting, much more flexible, much more open, much more understanding of the various challenges that any employee might face, whether that's because of their personal circumstances or whatever it may be. So when you suddenly find yourself in a situation where you need to adapt at pace to a genuinely unprecedented kind of global crisis, having done the work in advance to establish that kind of culture of inclusion and trust means that it's just so much easier to take people with you and to trust one another, whether it's a manager trusting their staff who they now can no longer see because they're not in the office, or whether it's the employee trusting the manager and the company more broadly that we have their best interests at heart and will do the right thing by them. I think that the time invested in really developing that culture in advance has really paid dividends and is one of the key things that made it possible for us to navigate our way through these challenging few months.
And probably the final question, but do you think the Google Cloud Technologies has helped shape that culture? And do you think that the changes that you've gone through due to the pandemic, how many of them will live on post-pandemic?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting to think the impact that technology can have on culture. And I think There are two aspects really where I think that there's been a really direct link. The first is the ready ability to collaborate. Okay, and I think the Telegraph has been using Google Apps for a long, long time now. So it's a journey we've been on for many, many years. So it's well-established practice. But that's not to underestimate the positive impact it has overall on the culture of the company. The ability to readily collaborate on documents and work more broadly in a real-time setting is very powerful for kind of cooperation. It gives everybody a voice. It removes that kind of historical situation where somebody is holding the pen and everybody else kind of is trying to chip in and get their points across. Everyone can work on things together. That in itself is very democratizing. I think it's really interesting as well to see the different way that people conduct themselves when they're meeting virtually. So one of the things that we've said through this period and beyond actually is that we're going to hold the majority of our meetings as virtual meetings. And that's not just because of pandemic practicalities. It's because we have observed that when you hold a meeting virtually, people are a bit more organized, it's a little bit more structured, it's a bit more productive. But most importantly of all, some of the quieter voices get their say more readily. And there is less of this loudest voice dominating the room, which I think is great because it's meant that really good ideas, great innovation has bubbled to the surface in a manner where sometimes it might have struggled to get the necessary airtime. So that's definitely down to the technology and definitely something we'll hang on to going forward. The other thing which I think has had a really big cultural impact is the ready availability of easily digested real-time data. So we have been working with Google BigQuery for a long time, but in the last couple of years, we've really focused on taking the power of BigQuery and using it to surface real-time dashboards for all employees. So we have these for the newsroom, for the senior editors, for the individual journalists, for our marketing team, for our commercial team, for our production teams. And in each case, we've spent careful time designing things that visually represent what's happening in the business in real time. And the ability to do that has made a huge difference because it's led to a sense of awareness, visibility, and it has facilitated immediate real-time decision-making, whereas previously, a lot of those decisions were dependent on receiving the report from the day before. And that is a really big change. It's a really big change. It has turned the conversation into a data-led conversation in the majority of cases. Very positive development, I think.
Oh, I'm so glad you made that data point. I think it's been one of the learnings for me going from a news organization to a technology company about the power of data and how much data is there that publishers have that is untapped. So it's great to hear that. Well, I'd just like to say overall, just a huge thank you to you, Chris. Thank you so much. I hope we can meet in person for a pint soon. But
I look forward to that also. Look, it's a pleasure to be asked. I'm always happy to join a conversation like this, share ideas and experiences for the greater good of others as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.